Hey, my name is Eric Skwarczynski. I'm the host of the Preacher Boys podcast.
I'm Suandria Lewis, licensed professional counselor and life coach with a heavy focus on trauma.
I'm Sarah Stankorb. I'm a religion reporter and author of Disobedient Women.
And I hope you'll join me for the 30 Days of Courage as I join a panel on religious trauma.
During Courage 365's 30 Days of Courage.
I look forward to seeing all of you, survivors and advocates, there.
Visit courage365.org/30 to sign up for free today.
Join us. Details below.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the 30 Days of Courage. I'm your host, Ashley Easter. I'm the founder and executive director of Courage 365, and we have an amazing show planned for you tonight. I am so excited that you are here during the month of October. If you are just new here, because maybe you came because you heard one of our panelist speakers was speaking, we've been doing this all month long. So during the month of October, for the 30 Days of Courage, we have panel discussions on all different topics around abuse and healing. And tonight, our panel discussion is going to be on religious trauma syndrome. And I know that a lot of people in our audience have experienced different types of religious trauma. Now, Courage 365 doesn't just serve clients who have religious trauma, but that is what we've kind of been known for. We serve all kinds of survivors, and we provide empowerment tools, education, and free resources. So tonight we're going to be having an incredible chat, and I can't wait to let our panelists onto the screen. Hey everyone, welcome to the show tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Hi.
So good to have you here. And you know what? I'm a believer in people really being able to introduce themselves. So I know everybody has seen the promo that we put out in the trailer ahead of this, but I want to give each of you the opportunity to kind of share about yourself in your own words, a little bit about what you do, who you are, if you've got a backstory you want to share, in about, 60 to 90 seconds. I know that's tight, but just give us a little bit of a hint of who you are. And Suandria, would you like to go first?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm Suandria Lewis. I'm a preacher's kid from the South, the Bible Belt South in the States. And I work as a licensed professional counselor in the state of Colorado and Florida. In my practice, I also have a coaching arm, which has really opened up my ability to work with clients all over the states and all over the world. It's been a fascinating journey to get so many different kinds of experiences. I have a focus on trauma, a niche in religious trauma. And the other area of focus is around life transitions. So they kind of play hand in hand. Anyone kind of starting a new page in life, whether it's one that you chose for yourself, like a new baby or marriage or moving, or something that was forced on you, a death of a loved one, a loss of a job, something that you're having to face and having to transition, even if you didn't choose it. So that's another area that I focus on. I work with adults, and we do individual therapy, couples therapy, group. I also speak at various universities, events like Courage 365. So I'm a pretty busy clinician.
That's amazing. And we're so excited to have you here. I feel like each of you have a different discipline, but it's all around trauma. And so I'm just really happy to have your therapist background here on the panel. So thank you so much, Suandria. Eric, how about you go next? And everybody, Eric is actually one of the Courage 365 board members. So welcome him back to the stage.
Well, now I don't have to say that part. Yeah. So in addition to being a board member for Courage 365, I grew up in a extremely tight-knit fundamentalist religious group that you could call a cult if you wanted to. You wouldn't be too far off there. I grew up a kid whose parents were in ministry, and spent a lot of time from the time I was born till the time I was about 23, 24 or so, kind of navigating around that world, and actually worked as a videographer and marketer for churches in that movement. So went to 20 different states, worked with several different churches creating promotional materials. And in a shocking twist, now I have a podcast called Preacher Boys, where I expose abuses that happen within that denomination using a lot of those same skills. So big full circle moment in an odd way. But yeah, the show's grown really quickly, raised a lot of awareness, 2.5 million downloads on the podcast, 2.5 million views on the YouTube side. And really the goal is just to raise awareness and equip survivors with what to do next, what to do if they come across an abusive situation, and things like that. So really appreciate being here tonight.
That's so amazing. And I think it's so interesting how a lot of times skills that were really a part of us were kind of exploited by high control groups you're in. But then when we get out, we're like able to shine our light so brightly. And I just love that about you, Eric. So thank you so much. And Sarah, how are you doing tonight? You want to introduce yourself to us?
Sure. So I'm Sarah Stankorb. I'm a writer. I think decent background on me personally. I grew up in the church. I was not an evangelical. I sort of bumped into evangelicalism and a bit of a problematic theology that then turned my faith into something that couldn't hold, and then it collapsed. And from that point, I've spent years fascinated by people of faith, people who left faith. I have 2 degrees in religion, one from the University of Chicago Divinity School, and like many people with a religion degree, don't work in religion. I am a reporter, and I do cover many religion stories and a lot of religious trauma. I recently published the book Disobedient Women, which features Ashley Easter, who was one of the women I met kind of early in my years covering this topic. But that's me.
I have so appreciated your work, and just I've worked with a lot of reporters, and the sensitivity and the trauma awareness that you have with your subjects is just unmatched. Like I've never met anybody with that amount of awareness and sensitivity in the media sphere like that. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on tonight. So I think this is going to be a great discussion, and everybody tuning in, I have a couple of pre-planned questions for our guests, but at the end we are going to do a live Q&A. So if you want to participate in that, just drop your questions in the comment section at any time during our discussion. And please use a question mark, because when I am skimming through all of the comments, it is easier for my eye to catch your question if you've used a question mark. So yes, we'll go back to those at the end. But the first question I have is for you, Suandria, and it is, what is religious trauma syndrome, and how does it differ from other types of abuse trauma?
I think the best way to look at it is to start with trauma on its own, and probably more importantly, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And when we think about that, we're talking about intense, disturbing thoughts and feelings that are related to traumatic experiences. And it's not a one-time thing. It's something that continues even after the traumatic event has ended. So when we look at religious trauma, we're looking at same thing, these intense, disturbing thoughts, feelings, responses that are coming up as a result of an intense, traumatic experience inside a religious context. And that's the key. What does it look like? We may have vivid flashbacks, right? Where it feels like something is happened, whatever happened to you in the traumatic experience is actually happening again. It can feel that intense in your body. Intrusive thoughts and images, intense distress, physical responses such as sweaty palms, deep breathing, uncontrolled deep breathing, almost panicky, nausea in the stomach, But one of the biggest things that I have noticed in working with my clients is this detachment from self, detachment from others, and a detachment from reality. Because with religion, high controlled religious experiences, that's usually what it's about, right? That you're not a part of the world, that God is greater, lean not to your own understanding. It's God has it, wait on the sweet by and by. It's a constant detachment from you, yourself, your thoughts, your choices, and even from other people. We can only be with people in a very specific way. We no longer have a choice in that. And then another thing that stands out to me when I think about religious trauma is that we end up limited, constricted. We experience this diminished capacity to think, to feel, to trust yourself. It's interrupted by the religious teaching, the expectations, the promise of escaping hell, the promise of eternity with God. But the requirement is to deny yourself, to deny your choice, to deny your feelings, to deny yearnings and longings, and make sure they all are come into subjection to God or whatever the religious belief is. How does it differ from other traumas? Mainly that it happens in the context of religious relationships and experiences. That is the main difference. It's trauma in a very similar way to other traumas that people experience, but is specific to religious relationships, context of religious relationships and experiences. The other thing that makes it really unique is that we live in a world where religion is accepted. We live in a country where it's often encouraged. So it's a real struggle for folks who are dealing with religious trauma, because you feel wrong for coming out when everyone in your family, when everyone in your neighborhood, when in your community, on our money, in so many areas of our country, of our lives, of our world, says that God is good and we're supposed to believe. And that can cause a lot of additional stress and heartbreak for folks that are dealing with religious trauma and hoping to heal.
That makes so much sense. And I love the broadness of your definition and like the descriptions you gave for each of those. Everybody in the comments, if this sounds familiar to you, either for yourself or people that you love, maybe kind of give us a thumbs up to know if this resonates with you. But the other thing I was thinking of and I wanted to kind of follow up with you about is it seems to me that religious trauma is a little bit unique in that it's often focused on not just what happens in our life here and now, but like the afterlife. And so there's like an additional piece of fear. It's not just of an abuser here, but it's like, if I don't get this right, it's not just for now, but it's for like all of eternity. And it seems like it's an extra layer of fear and seriousness around a lot of things. Does that sound right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, you detach from yourself, you detach from others, you detach from reality,
Mm.
right? We lose our power here and now and we give it away. God has to fix it. God has to um, resolve it for me either now or in the sweet by and by.
Mm-hmm.
And it leaves us powerless today. The choices we need to make, having boundaries, owning our yes, owning our no, belief in ourselves, we give that away. And not just to God. If you come from the religion I was in, it may be the devil, right?
Mm.
So I'm disempowered. Even if I'm making horrible decisions that I need to learn from, the devil made me do it. I get to
Right.
give that away too, right? And if I do something that I'm proud of, that I worked really hard for, thank you, God. And I still don't get to feel the power, the weight of my choice. So
Mm.
absolutely, there's a separation from the reality that you're experiencing, because the religion says it's God or the devil, right? The reward is coming or the punishment is coming, but we never really get to own the power of our choices that are happening right now.
Hmm. That is so well put. Thank you so much for that. Oh, Sarah, The next question I have is for you, and that's in your research and investigations. I know you're a journalist, and a lot has been around religious trauma. What are some of the key findings or patterns that you've noticed related to religious trauma? Because I'm guessing you've picked up like there's a lot of the same stuff happening in each of these different stories.
Yeah, and thank you for leading with that. I'm not an expert in the way that Suandria is. I'm an observer. That's the core of what I do. And something that I have observed is these are people who, and it makes me nervous, honestly, as a reporter, knowing there are other reporters, but these are folks who genuinely trust me very quickly, more quickly than I think it is safe if they were to trust other people. And I guess that's a caution that I see as a threat through people with religious trauma. Um, I think I often see a true desire to be believed in fear that they will not be believed. Um, I think many people come from a community where just speaking up alone is dangerous, it's seen as sinful. And so they're making a very big risk, and they want me to hear them and hear what they're saying as true. During the interview process, there's a rhythm that I've learned where I can feel that we're building up often to like the heart of the matter or a core memory. And it takes time. I'm not jumping in with people asking them about like the worst thing that happened to them or what ruined their faith. So we build over time, and I think do establish needed trust through that process. Um, but when they get to key memories, when people have really been through something, there are these specific details that pop out. So I've had a survivor of sexual assault tell me the color of the floral pattern in the couch next to where she was assaulted. Um, there is a specificity that is unique to people who've had trauma. Um, and I think as we're winding up to that, I just have to be aware that we're not working on my timeline. I'm working on their timeline in the unraveling of their story. And as they tell me the story, it may not be chronological. It very likely will not be chronological. It may come in jumps and spurts. And that it's my job later to establish a chronological timeline and figure out when did what happen, and then go back and say, do I have this right? Um, I have to be constantly fact checking, double checking. And then just two other pieces. It's such a big decision to step forward. And I, I don't push people. I actually have in the past dissuaded sources from using their names. I've seen how difficult it can be, just the consequences for people who step up, and then suddenly there's a spotlight on them, and they had wanted to tell their story, but they didn't want international news. So I think it's my job to make sure they're telling me, no, this is what I have to do as part of my healing, to use my name in this way. And then the last bit that I've seen quite a bit, and I think this is specific to at least sexual assault / religious trauma, is there can be a lot of guilt. I think especially in very restrictive, high control religious communities, there's so many rules. And when something awful has happened to a person, they can sometimes have this belief that it was their fault, that something they did led to what happened. Um, and as a reporter, when I see these consistent variables in behavior, I'm always, it's my job to check for credibility. And these are indicators to me that something real has happened. Not that not that I'm skeptical that people are making these up, excuse me, but more that it's my job to be able to prove to other people that this is a credible source. And as I'm doing that, seeing these indicators tells me, yeah, they're telling me something very deep and very real that lives in them still.
Mhm.
Wow. Yeah. That's so incredible the way that you picked up on all of those different things, because having studied different bits of trauma for years, like all of that makes sense to the survivors I've worked with. The thing that really stuck out to me about what you said, though, is how quick a lot of times survivors are to talk with you. And I see you as such a safe person. That has been my experience of you. But I also think that it's the reason I feel that way is because you take such care with people's stories. And kind of to your point, like it's a little alarming how fast sometimes people trust, because that's not been my experience with all reporters. Not all reporters have been sensitive, caring, understanding of trauma, and sometimes you kind of feel like they're, just there to get a job done. And so I know that some people have felt traumatized in a process like that. And so for you to not only be aware of that and then hold that as like, I want to be a safe person, because maybe they don't know how to set boundaries yet with their story. And so because they haven't been able to figure that part out, I'm going to make sure I'm a safe person to report to. And yeah, that just makes so much sense. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely,
Sure.
absolutely. So, the next question I have is for you, Eric. And, you've had a podcast platform for a couple years now, and it's really grown and taken off. I mean, you have millions and millions of views, and you're talking about stories really in sort of a niche religious organization. So, it's so amazing how it has not only spoken to people from there, but like in religious trauma in general. But I'm kind of wondering, like, as you are platforming survivors and calling out people who are religious abusers, what has the response been in general when you've kind of exposed people or brought to light these abuses? Like, how is this affecting survivors as they're hearing this? How is this kind of being responded to by maybe religious organizations? And I don't know. I know I'm asking you kind of a multifaceted question, but do you see any change actually happening? Because I know you take care of people with these stories like all the time.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I really appreciated what was just said about when survivors come and trust with their story. One, not to just push them to get a story out, because I think, at the end of the day, whether you're an author or a podcaster or a TV journalist, there is a piece of that where that is your job, or your goal is, I'm producing content on this topic. And I see a lot of people that go too far into the tabloid route, where it's whatever I have to do, no matter who I have to run over, I need to create my piece of content, and it's a very cold and very aggressive way to tell these stories. And I love hearing when somebody says, oh, I've dissuaded somebody from coming and sharing their story. I've sent them to a therapist first, or I've sent them to a law enforcement first, if there's something that they can do that I, as a podcaster, can't do, or someone as an author can't do. I've sent them to a lawyer to talk through other options. Like, the goal, first and foremost, I just want to echo, is that it needs to be what's best for the survivor, not just for the, content engine or the algorithm. And there's stories that I know would get a lot of views if I just cranked them out a certain way. but that's not the best way to do it. And I say all that to lay a foundation to say I have seen really cool results from sharing stories when it is the best time for the survivor and when it feels like the right time to talk about this particular story in a respectful way. Now, I'm going to talk, you asked about both how has it affected survivors and how has it affected the people who have either been exposed themselves or the environment they've been exposed in. For the survivor side, what I've noticed is that, and I'm sure anybody who's listening to this feels this way, there's a immense sense of loneliness with most survivors that I talk to. And I would say with most people who, like myself, have left very strict religious upbringings that maybe most people that they're coworkers with haven't experienced, or most people they run into at the grocery store haven't experienced. It can feel like you are the only one in the entire world that has experienced these things. And
Mhm.
it's true in a sense that you are one of few people that can probably relate to your story, but there's a lot of people within that small niche. And so the most beneficial thing I think that's happened through the Preacher Boys podcast is that someone is sitting there listening to an hour-long interview with somebody whose experience resonates with them. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing. I think the other piece of that is that people who are sharing their story feel empowered. Within the independent fundamental Baptist movement, you have, say, female survivors who grew up in a denomination where a typically white male pastor holds the microphone and all the power within the church. And so to be able to share their story and hold the microphone themselves and share on their own terms is a really powerful and empowering thing that I know initiates a lot of times a healing journey for them, which is really cool to be a small step in that process. And I'm not an expert. I'm not maybe an armchair expert at this point, but I'm somebody that can just sit down and, like, the power of the platform is I get to extend a microphone to somebody else to share their story. Now, as far as the response from religious leadership and for the people who are maybe getting burned a little bit through the show, um, the response is what you'd expect. When you're throwing a rock into a pack of wolves, they start, howling. And I get a lot of pastors that get very upset with what I do. And the posture of pastors that's very confusing to me is that many get defensive even when they're not the initial one in the line of fire. And whenever one of these stories happens, my expectation of churches would be that you would want to quickly say, that's not what we represent, and stand with the victim. But instead, you see a lot of pastors and churches get on the defensive and start going, we need to protect the brand, whether it's the brand of Christianity, whether it's the brand of their specific denomination. And I don't think they realize that it makes their brand look worse when they stand on the side of the predator and not the victim themselves. And so, I guess my encouragement to any pastor or someone who identifies as a Christian would be, you know, make a point when these stories happen to stand with the victim first and foremost, because that's the right thing to do. But beyond that, this is your opportunity to show, if you are not like that, it's your opportunity to exemplify that and lead by example in doing the right thing. And so the reaction from survivors, which is the only one I really truly care about at the end of the day, has been very positive, and uh, I've seen it be a great tool to people. And then on the flip side, for pastors who have chosen to, you know, align themselves with the wrong people, the reactions don't surprise me anymore. And I would hope that, you know, those who are the good guys would continue to take a stand for what's right. But my experience with that hasn't been too positive.
Yeah, it's it's frustrating because, like you said, so many times it's just like rallying the troops and, circling the wagons. And you would think when somebody had experienced religious trauma that it would be like better even for their brand to be like, hey, we don't want this to happen here, and so we're going to support the victims, so people can feel safe in our community. But it's so often different than that. And but I love the approach to your show as well, how you're looking at, is this going to be an empowering time for the survivor to share a story? Do they need to see a different professional first before they do that? And then also for those who do choose to talk about their religious trauma, they have a space and a platform to do it, because I know for myself and so many people, it can be really healing, particularly when you've been silenced for so many years. It almost feels like it's burning a hole in you to not be able to say it out loud and have other people hear it. And to kind of be able to give that platform is just really, really valuable. So thank you for that, Eric. Yeah. Now, I've got a question for all of you, and it doesn't matter which order you go in, but this is, what are some misconceptions or maybe myths surrounding religious trauma that you'd like to dispel? Maybe this is something you've seen in your work or in popular society. But Sarah, did I see you raising your hand? You want to go first?
Yes. So, sorry. Okay. Trying to contain myself and be professional. Something that drives me a little kooky is this automatic response that, oh, well, these people, especially when it's a group of people with consistent stories, this response that they must be lying. And one of the, I think, myths that gets perpetuated in order to tamp down stories when people come forward is that these are only conspiracies made up by people who, don't like Minister X. And so they've come together and made up these outlandish claims. That's something that if you've seen Shiny Happy People, but the Bill Gothard story still to this day is supporters claim that the case against Bill Gothard was a social media conspiracy and part of a midlife crisis on behalf by the survivors. I think it's similar to a lot of the denialists about the abuse and cover-up crisis within the Southern Baptist Convention. This and I think I understand intellectually why people jump to that step, because they too trusted these people, they trusted their church, they trusted their minister. And when you wish to continue believing in someone, then you can do the mental gymnastics to invent a conspiracy, um, and not be willing to critically examine evidence when it's given to you. That's my example. I'll step back now.
No, that is so good, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think it even goes back to what you said about a lot of survivors from religious trauma circles being so quick to trust. I think there's this culture of like, we need to believe that everybody here is good. And so I'm not going to say everybody should walk through life assuming everybody is out to get them. That's probably not healthy either. But when there's this assumption that like anybody who is a part of the church, especially leaders, are obviously going to be good people, or they wouldn't be protecting abusers. Yeah, it's really toxic and harmful, and people create like these mental gymnastics. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you for that, Sarah.
I want to add just one thing to that, because I love that answer, and I was hopeful that those points would get brought up. I want to add one more, just as a former fundamentalist myself, and just what I've seen talking to so many different people who've left that environment. And I think the assumption often is that people who are identifying as having religious trauma, or people who are coming forward and sharing stories of everything from spiritual abuse to sexual abuse, a lot of times, in addition to it being called a conspiracy, those people, and I've been labeled this many times, it's like you're bitter, you're angry, you just hate the church, you hate religion, you fill in the blank. And what I've noticed from my own experience and from people that I've spoken to is that usually the people who carry the biggest amount of hurt from the church are those who are the most bought in. like the people who truly believed that this was God's calling on their life, that they had the truth, that their bubble was safe, like those people were harmed, I think, in the, I don't want to say in the deepest way, but I would say those are the people that I tend to see be the most outspoken advocates. And I know, Ashley, I know this would represent you. I know this would represent me. I believed that we were we were God's chosen people and we were a lighthouse on a hill. And to see that falling apart, I think adds another layer of trauma to, oh, I've been lied to. Like we were not safer than the Catholic Church. We were not safer than this other group that we talk about. Our environment is just as toxic, if not more toxic. And I think that's a lot to grapple with. And I think it's something that, when someone is as deeply hurt as some people you see sharing their story, you have to ask why. And if it's the environment they didn't care about, they probably would have just forgotten about it and moved on. It's because it's a place you thought was something when it really wasn't. That's a lot to grapple with.
Mm. Yeah, you're right. No, I definitely identify with that. And yeah, I was all in, all in. And when I saw the lies and the deception and the abuse, it was like a dagger to the heart. And that's why I had to talk about it because I didn't want anybody else to have that. And so I think that that's just so, so true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sandria, do you have any thoughts around this here?
Yeah, I wanted to add, or just, yeah, add to what you all are already have already started here, that, and I think, Sarah, you said this, to leave is a big deal, right? And it's so dismissive to say they're just mad, right? They didn't get their way. I remember someone saying to me, "You just want to sin." Why would I disrupt my life in this way just to sin? Right? But people that leave have given it so much thought, so much prayer, so much faith, so much hope. To leave is gut wrenching. It's painful. It's heartbreaking. It's not something we do lightly. So I think the misconception is that you're just mad. No, Eric, I think you said this, that the people that are harmed the most are often the most bought in. That is that is
Yeah.
so real. That is why the walking away is such a heartbreak, because I took it seriously. I
Yep.
believed my entire life was invested in this belief system, right? It takes a lot of courage, a lot of introspection, a lot of gray areas, because you don't know where to go from there when that was your life, when that was the answer for everything. To walk away, you're walking into nothing, is what you think. What else is even available? Because I've been here so long that I don't even know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's one misconception. Wasn't the one I planned to share, but what you all were talking about, I was like, yeah.
No, that is so
That's
good. When I when I think about what you said, just sort of people accusing others of wanting to leave just so they can sin. It's like the way people are often treated when they leave is so terrible that like the
Mhm.
quote sin, wouldn't even be worth it if that was really what they were just, trying to do. And it's just such a warped point of view, and I think people are just trying to not have to ask questions for themselves a lot of times of why somebody could maybe find a legitimate reason that this group isn't right for them.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and
And Ashley, sorry, just I feel like there's one more layer still,
yeah,
and that's the people who become advocates. There's that same disparagement. Like they just want to sin, they don't live by Satan. But so many of them, what's left of their faith, that kernel of love for other human beings or whatever that is, that's what motivates them to speak up. So it's not that they had this dramatic, they did have an existential turn, but they're still this, they're driven by a form of goodness in their advocacy, in their speaking up, in doing the things that make the people within the church so uncomfortable. And I think that's also very misperceived.
Definitely. No, you're so right. You're so right with that. And we've got one more question before we start taking in some of these questions from the audience. And everybody who's tuning in, feel free to go ahead and drop your questions. Just make sure you use question marks so I can find them easily as I skim through. But we have one last question just for all three of you, and that is, have you or your clients or subjects or guests, have you found things or heard of things that people have shared with you that are helpful in recovering from religious trauma?
Mm-hmm. I'll just, and again, clearly we all work in the same area because so much of what Sarah and Eric shared are right in line with the things that I do as a clinician. So bravo for the love and the support that you're providing this community with. But talking in safe environments, Ashley, I think you said it, it's important to use your voice because it was silenced, right? If it wasn't in line with the word, if it wasn't approved by, the leadership, then it wasn't to be said. You better take it to God. You can't speak it here. So much healing comes as you just start to speak, tell your story, tell your truth. Another one is to have that experience validated. And validation doesn't mean I agree. It just means I believe your story. And the thing with trauma is, again, we're separated from reality when we're injured in traumatic ways. And so people are, Sarah, piecing their stories together, right? It may not be a straight line. They're responding to sensations and responses in the body. You mentioned someone remembering a pattern. That is a trauma response. When we're in a space where we don't have power, this is trauma. We're the only one in the story with no power. Our bodies will take over and try to figure out, how do I become safe here? And sometimes it's to focus on something else in the room. And so a pattern can become that powerful and that safe for a person because they don't have the power to be in this space and speak up and have a voice and say no. So validating that experience just by saying, I believe you, is super powerful. Psychoeducation around what trauma is, what it isn't. I think it's important to know that everyone that experiences a traumatic event in religious context isn't necessarily traumatized. There's a distinction there. And I could go on and on about that. But again, psychoeducation around what has happened to you and helps you know how to move forward. Therapy, coaching, books, podcasts, anything that you can get your hands on that allows for free thinking, critical thinking, to say it all. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything. We leave the box of everything here is the same. It's important to just allow information to hear, to think, to consider, open your mind, right, to other people's worldviews, languages, music, travel. Just opening your life can be so therapeutic and healing. And then one more that I want to mention is, because religious trauma happens in the context of relationship, often in relationship, healing happens in the context of relationship. So these safe spaces that we provide folks, this is healing. Connecting with people. And it's sometimes the hardest thing to do because we don't want to regroup again. I left the group. I'm not doing any more groups. No, thank you. But anyone watching, anyone listening, and you're on that cusp of, I don't really know if I can connect with another person again because I don't trust. What you're learning is to trust yourself and know that you can choose safe people. And the minute it doesn't feel safe, you get to say, no, thank you. But your healing is, a large part of your healing is in connecting with other safe human beings and learning to love again, to do life together again. Don't let religious trauma or harmful religious experiences rob you of a full life.
Wow. That was just chock full with so many suggestions and insights. Thank you so much for that. Eric, do you have any thoughts from maybe things you learned from your guests or your research?
Yeah, thanks for putting me after the licensed counselor to answer this question. No, I mean, I'm going to give two really simple answers. Um, I, I, I think as helpful as, and I agree, books, podcasts, obviously I think podcasts can be helpful. I'm a little biased there, but I think documentaries, I think the validation of experience is very important. I think on the flip side of that, I also think it's important to recognize when you need to step away from immersing yourself in materials about your experience. And I'm speaking to myself here because when I started Preacher Boys, I scheduled, several interviews a day and I went full force into it. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I feel horrible right now because I've just been soaking in this world that I was already soaking in and I'm already trying to heal from. And then I'm not giving myself any time to breathe. And so, my really, really advanced strategy is take some time to step away from it. And literally, for me, that means after I do an interview, 9 times out of 10, I go outside and I take a walk. Like that's my high level strategy for dealing with this stuff is taking time to reconnect with being outside, being away from true crime documentaries and books and things that are reminding me of something that's really heavy, and just trying to just balance out, get back to like what does feeling good feel like and try to maintain that. On the flip side of that, what I would say too is recognize that, especially if you left a cultish environment, I would say be very careful not to just jump full force into something else. We are fundamentalists by nature. We want to believe that it's black and white. It's this one thing. And I see a lot of people that leave their church group and go to this, far other side atheist influencer that, and they just align with everything they say, and they could be right about a lot of things, but like, uh, feel free to like search around a little bit and have a foot in a couple different places. And that means too, like even with my show, I've told people my show might not be the fit for you and what you need. It may be a different brand that's a little lighter and maybe doesn't cover the sexual abuse side, just the religious side. Like find what works for you. And, it's not, oh, us versus them in whatever circle you're in.
Mm, that's so good. And I really resonate with that part about kind of stepping back. I think sometimes it's almost like going through all the different stages of grief, which includes
Mm.
anger, where the anger motivates you to create change. And part of that anger is, in researching and finding these things. And that's helpful because it causes you to be like, I'm not going to let this happen to me or anybody else. And it causes us to move forward. But then there can be a place where it's like, okay, I have enough like energy to move forward now. And I need to like cool down the flames just so I can like feel happy again. I don't always need to be a toasted marshmallow, all the time. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Eric. Sarah, what about you? Any thoughts?
I mean, if it was hard being second, being third is worse. But I would say community seems to help. I've covered a lot of online communities. So just that taking what Eric was describing, where you feel like you're alone and seeing through other people's stories, and really they could be through podcasts, they could be a book, people read books. Um, any of those avenues to see it's not just me. I think that helps. I've seen some people heal through fighting for others, and I've also seen some people start to heal, get so burdened out, and then need to heal from the activity of fighting for others as well. So that can be a double-edged thing. Um, One of the more beautiful stories I heard in the last couple of months was a woman that I covered in my book, and then a woman I had covered for a story for Vice. They got their copies of the book and they held a book launch, which was them being able to read their stories out loud to people in their community across the street from a facility associated with the religious structure that hurt them. And just that moment of being heard, that was also a reclamation of power. So, and they were able to just read it. They didn't have to come up with their own revelations. Like that work was done for them, fortunately. But the there was just a unique pride in being able to say we did this, and people saw us, and to be able to send a picture. So I think finding little victories where you can say, "This is me. This is what happened." Somewhere safe for people who will hear it. Um, I think that's really beautiful, and I hope it is a part of the healing process.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I've definitely seen people burned out from advocacy. I've been there a few times to regroup. But yeah, being able to speak the story, that has been a real gift with your book, because sometimes people can tell their story verbally, but being able to have it put in chronological order and written down in a way that maybe they weren't exactly sure how to put the words to, that's really powerful. Um, well, thank you, all three of you, for your insights. I think what we're going to do now is jump into the live questions here. And the first one is going to be for you, Sandria, and it is, where do we go to find religious trauma therapists?
mychoicemypower.com is where you can find me. um, there's the Religious Trauma Institute. You can find religious trauma therapists there. Secular Therapist is another platform where you can find religious trauma therapists. And depending on, you can even work with a trauma therapist that maybe doesn't have a religious spin. Because, like I said earlier, the difference is the religious context, but some of the impact, some of the responses that happen, the ways that will help you to heal can be pretty consistent with other trauma experiences.
That's really helpful. Yeah, and I also have found that if a therapist isn't necessarily trained in religious trauma therapy, but they're trained in trauma therapy,
Yeah.
in your initial phone call with them, where you're kind of interviewing them, just saying, hey, are you willing to study a bit about religious trauma therapy and do some of that work? And a lot of times you can tell if the therapist is really going to be able to cater to your needs, if they're like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely going to, do a little bit more research on that so I can help you better. And so sometimes even asking for what you need can be helpful. So all those are great advice. Thank you. This one I think I'm going to send over to you, Eric. It says, how do you recommend opening a conversation with clergy or people you know in the church that you think may be more open than many to listening so you can build awareness about abuse? Perhaps people who are more open to change. I think you've had maybe some pastors on your podcast, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I've had a couple, and I've had a couple that have called me, discreetly and asked questions and things. And I mean, I think it's just that it's having the conversation, as far as, you know, here's the thing, like the litmus test for good versus bad, I think in this context is like, if they do see it as a legitimate issue and they're wanting to avoid it, like that's all I need to see is like, are you taking steps to actually protect? If their argument is like, I don't think this really happens, and it's, I don't think you necessarily need to waste your time on those conversations because the evidence is there. But yeah, as far as having the conversation, I think it's just figuring out what they need most. Is it resources for protecting their church? Do they need help with their security? Do they need help with coming up with systems and check-ins for their, nursery? Like there's a lot of different layers under that, but I would just say, as far as like initiating the conversation, I think it's literally just asking them, what are you doing to protect, women and children and everybody within your church, and seeing what the response is. And then if it's something they've never really thought about, I think at that point it's just going, here's the things that I've read, or here's the things and resources that have helped me. Maybe you should take a look and start considering this, because I find with everybody, there's like one of three things. It's either they've never thought about it because they've never seen it happen within the church they've been in, so they just assume we're good. They don't care about the issue, in which case, again, I would just say get out of that church and encourage others to do the same. Or they care about it, but they don't know how to go about approaching it, in which case I recommend, them reading books. I mean, Boz Chividian has written a lot of interesting books about actual processes and practical application things there. So at that point, it's just educating with resources. But yeah, I'd say initiating is literally just asking them, what are you doing about this, and seeing what they have to say, and then going from there.
That's really good. Yeah, thank you for that. Sarah, this question's for you, and it's what are some of the guidelines or benchmarks in someone's healing journey that you look for so you can safely recommend them sharing their stories of abuse? Like, what are the criteria to kind of be like, okay, yeah, this is one where they're ready to share?
Oh, that's a good question, and it's really kind of a case by case. But I think one one easier one is if they have come forward before and they know what that process is like. So that doesn't necessarily mean in the news, but they've talked to police, they've talked to a therapist, they've spoken up at their church, and I and it's difficult to put emotions into words. But if I feel as though, oh, when they tell me their story, it's still very raw to them, and they're still in the process of, if they break down crying in a way that like they cannot breathe, they're not ready to have the story public. If they this is something they've never told anyone else before, well, I'm not going to be able to get that through legal, very likely, unless they have some sort of documentation. But to that tells me they haven't been able to go through some of the steps that they'll need just to feel like this is theirs, because we're gonna have to be working together for a while. I'm gonna have to keep asking questions. I will have to ask details. I will have to find ways to verify as much as I can. And if I am just ripping open a wound every time we talk about this is the odd thing to be doing. This is only going to hurt you over and over and over. And then a story's going to come out and you won't have the scar tissue to deal with the public eye. So that's, I know, a very squishy answer, but it is something I sort of gauge person by person. But I think that those things that's what's kind of running through my head.
Yeah, I think those are really good gauges, and just the fact that you look at those, I think just really speaks to your skills as a journalist and author. Um, okay, next question. I think I'm gonna give this one to Sandria. Says, what if my story is going to hurt others? I can't justify my need to speak my story um, over someone else's hurt other than the abuser. So it sounds like maybe somebody that's not the abuser could feel hurt by this person sharing their story, but they also feel like they really need to share it. What are your thoughts around that?
From a clinical perspective, if a client is seeing a therapist, it's confidential. So anything you share in that therapeutic space won't go beyond that space. So that can still be very helpful, healing for you, to talk about it. And sometimes in that talking and processing, you get a different frame, you learn different language, you learn different, um, what's important, what's not, what part of this is about you, what part of the story is about the other person. Just something about that safe therapeutic environment enables you to process the story in a different way, so that if necessary, you may find out it's not necessary. Maybe you need to deal with what's happening with you around it, because unless it's a child, I can say that children we need to speak up for, right? But if there's another adult making choices for their lives and they're not ready to change it, it's not really anything you can do about that. But you can take care of yourself. You can speak your truth. You can talk about what you're experiencing, what you're seeing. Um, if there's a strategy you can put together, a plan for others, sometimes people do want out but don't know how. So that's something that can come out of therapy and activism. It really just depends on the situation. I don't I don't ever think silence is the answer. So even if you again start in a safe therapeutic space where it doesn't go beyond um, that session or those sessions, start there. Start somewhere. You have to speak.
Yeah, I think that's really good. A lot of times, strategizing with a therapist can really make a huge difference. Eric, I think I want to give this one to you. It's have you seen any patterns? Maybe this has been for yourself or others of when people are ready to start helping other people and not just kind of focusing on their own healing, but kind of doing that outward facing.
Yeah. And just really quickly too, I just want to clarify too, sharing your story doesn't always have to be either not sharing your story or a massive platform. And I can see from some of the comments, some people are like, how do I know I'm ready? And it's like, some people may never be ready to go in the New York Times and share their story, like, and you don't have to in order to find what you need from sharing your story. Sharing your story could be telling my friend or my family member or someone close, and that's it. Because that's all, like, you're not a public figure and you don't want to be. That's totally okay. As far as when you're ready to help others, I think that's the exact same. It's the flip side of that coin, which is helping others. I think we can look at the advocacy world and go, I could never be a Sarah and write a book with everybody's stories in it. I could never produce a documentary. I could never start a podcast. I don't have credentials to be a therapist. I think you're ready to help people right now in terms of being a listener to them, hearing people, not just trying to equate everyone's story with your story and or downplaying or subverting their story onto something else. Like, I think everybody who can listen and be a support system for others, you're ready to do that right now. Now, as far as whether you're ready to help people on a larger stage, I would say, I mean, I don't even know that I was necessarily ready when I started my show. I don't think you really know till you start seeing, oh shoot, people that aren't people I know are listening to this now. I mean, you just have to trust, to sound like Ashley right now, you have to trust your intuition on that a little bit and do what feels right. And I think taking your skills and saying, I'm really good at writing, can I help that way? I'm really good at, for me, I had a background in media, so that was a no-brainer. Like, let me grab a microphone and a camera and see what I can do. For some it might be blogging, for some it might be hosting a local meetup. Like, just trust your own skills and abilities and leverage those in the way that's most helpful. And again, it doesn't have to be on a macro, like 10 million listener scale. It doesn't have to be New York Times. It could be 4 or 5 people that I have a huge impact on. And that might be even more meaningful because you have a lot more one-to-one with those people.
Hmm. Thank you for that. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for questions today. Thank you so much to all our panelists. You guys have been incredible. All of them have different resources. Sandria has a coaching and therapy platform. Um, Eric has Preacher Boys podcast, and Sarah has her book, Disobedient Women. And all of those links and resources are going to be pinned to the top of this Facebook group. And if you're watching this later after the 30 Days of Courage is over, either on YouTube or a podcast, it's going to be in the show notes. You can easily access their information there. Um, so we're going to be wrapping it up, but before we do, I just have a couple of quick announcements that I want to share with everyone. So if you have been participating in the 30 Days of Courage, not only do we have these panel discussions every week, this is actually our last panel discussion, so you can catch up on the replays that are pinned to the top of the Facebook group, but we also have weekly self-care challenges. And Our last weekly self-care challenge is going to be posted on Sunday, and this is the prize that you have the opportunity to win. It is the Magic of Sleep book by Calm. It's really about getting a lot of self-care, good rest, and sleep. It's really a great book. And here's the thing. If you want to be entered into our grand prize drawing, you have to have completed all 4 self-care challenges. And again, all the details are pinned to the top of the group. And even if you missed a week, you can go back, and as long as you have completed the self-care challenge before Sunday, then you will be entered into the drawing. As long as you completed all 4, you'll be entered into the grand prize. And I'm sorry, 4 is already out. It was actually put out on Sunday. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm really excited about this one, guys, to end the 30 Days of Courage, we have our very own live game show called The Ultimate Courage Showdown. It's going to be corny, it's going to be silly, it's going to be funny. It's going to be something you want to tune into. We've got these great contestants here. We've got the first contestant is Jericho Wrecking Ball Sela. Then we've got in the middle there Crazy Carl Forehand, and of course Megan Mouth of the South Benninger. And they're going to be battling it out in our trivia game. All the trivia questions are going to be based on things that we learned inside of these panel discussions. So if you as an audience member want to play along by putting your answers in the comments, it's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be Monday night at 7, so stay tuned for that. And then the last thing I want to mention is on Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, we're having our last peer support group. It's only 30 minutes long. It's going to be something that's really great if you're looking for connection, a way to kind of talk about things that you've learned this week, and maybe anything coming up in your life. It's just a real good support system and a great way to get to know other survivors and advocates. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to the 30 Days of Courage. I hope you all have a good rest of your week, and as always, live with courage.